Thank you. It is an honor to be here today. I represent Family Watch International. We are honored to sponsor this event, and I'm honored to be a board member of the Political Network for Values. I've been asked to talk about a difficult subject. It's the comprehensive sexuality education agenda, the war on our families, our children, and society. And this war is raging across the world and attacking our families, and it's perpetrated at the United Nations. And I've been asked to talk to you about what is happening at the United Nations on all of these issues. You may be aware that UNAIDS is the premier agency across the world tasked with stopping the AIDS pandemic. But you may not be aware that this agency is promoting the very things that cause AIDS in the name of preventing AIDS. For example, they have their international guidelines on HIV, AIDS, and human rights that they try to get recognized at all UN conferences. And instead of saying that children need to and people need to be more responsible with their sexual behavior, in this guidelines it says that in order to prevent AIDS, nations must legalize abortion, adultery, fornication, prostitution, same-sex marriage, and provide sexuality education for children about all these rights. In other words, the very things that cause AIDS. I went to Africa, the country of Mozambique, to implement an abstinence-based program, and this young man was my guide. His name was Rogerio. Little did I know that he would introduce us to 3 of his brothers and sisters, and that we would eventually adopt these children into our family from Mozambique. And in the process of adopting them, it took about 7 years of trips back and forth to Mozambique. I learned a lot about what was on the ground from these UN agencies, what kind of policies and education programs they were pushing onto children. In fact, we also didn't know that this young man would die of AIDS, this older brother, and I would care for him during the last stage of AIDS. So to me, it is unconscionable that in the name of preventing AIDS, the United Nations is pushing the very behaviors that causes AIDS. In fact, my daughter Amelia, when I was in Mozambique with her, she was only 10 years old when she brought home an instruction manual on how to engage in different sexual acts. This is unconscionable and should not be accepted. We've created a documentary on this called The War on Children that we're going to have some information passed out to you on how you can access this. It's been subtitled in 12 different languages, but I'm going to teach you what is happening with this sexuality education at the United Nations and being pushed on all the nations of the world. They're after our children. They know if they can raise up the next generation in their radical sexual and gender ideologies, they will have the future, they will have the culture, they will have our laws, they will have the world. So it's a war over laws related to sexuality, gender, and sex, and what's going to be taught to children, what's going to be taught in the schools at the youngest ages and in the universities about these things. It's an assault on the health and innocence of our children being perpetuated by United Nations agencies, as I will show you. The #1 tool of the global sexual rights revolution is something called comprehensive sexuality education. What is this sexuality education, also known as CSE? In 2009, UNESCO, the agency charged with helping all the nations of the world have good education, came out with their guidelines on sexuality education. This was intended to drive all the policies worldwide through education systems. In this publication, they reveal their agenda. Respect for the different sexual orientations and gender identities should be taught to children at age 12. And children at age 15 should be taught how to advocate for abortion, how to promote abortion in laws and policies. Then they came out a little bit later with a slightly toned down version of this. And in 2018, they came out with the International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education. Now this is backed by the firepower of all of these UN agencies. And in this guidance for the whole world, backed by all the UN agencies, it redefines abstinence not just to mean abstaining from sex, but also deciding when to start having sex and with whom. That's the new definition of abstinence. It says this sexuality education promotes the right to choose, we're talking about children, when and with whom a person will have any sexual relationship. Children are taught to recognize that each person's decision to be sexually active should be respected at all times. Respect promiscuity. Children are to learn about sexual pleasure and all the key elements associated with it. Sexual responses to stimulation. They confuse them about their gender. They need to know the differences between their gender identity and that it might not match their biological sex. And they ask these children, they get into their minds to question the social and cultural norms that impact sexual behavior. And they want to separate them from their parents. It asks them to differentiate between the values that they hold and that their parents or guardians hold regarding sexuality education. Now I want to remind you, this is backed by all these UN agencies, including UNICEF, the agency charged with protecting the world's children. They have published this manual, and it actually states that governments should allow children to consent to certain medical treatments without the permission of a parent. And that includes also education and guidance on sexual health, including abortion. This is UNICEF. And UNICEF also says for adolescents, the possibility to have access to sexual and reproductive health services without parental consent is a critical dimension of their access. The dangerous word, access. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, in monitoring the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, now is reinterpreting that treaty to say that children have reproductive freedom. They should have counseling without parental guardianship, or without parental consent, and of course sexual education to teach them about all of their sexual rights. The World Health Organization. This is the agency charged with protecting and setting the standards for all the people in the world to protect our health. They created the sexuality education standards for Europe, and they actually want to start with newborns to 4 years old, and teach them about touching their body parts for sexual pleasure, confusing them about their gender, inviting them to explore their gender identities. Starting at age 4, teaching them about same-sex relationships and respect for diversity regarding sexuality. 9 to 12, confusing them again about their gender identity. And the worst part of this is the World Health Organization is actually sending children to International Planned Parenthood Federation to learn about their sexual rights. UNFPA, they're involved in this too. They hosted a youth conference and created a declaration that supposedly represents all youth. And what do youth want, according to UNFPA? They want autonomy over their pleasures and their bodies. They want abortion. They want legalized prostitution, same-sex marriage, and of course, sexuality education to teach them about all those things. And we have the UN Human Rights Committee that just redefined a binding treaty, the provision on the right to life, to mean the right to kill, the right to abortion. We're truly living in a world turned upside down, where sexual wrongs are being promoted as sexual rights. An International Planned Parenthood Federation is at the center of this. They are driving and writing many of these manuals and many of these policies with these UN agencies. And they have 65,000 service points in 170 countries, and they benefit financially when children are sexualized. When children are sexualized, they need condoms, contraceptives, sexual counselings, abortions, now even hormone treatments or cross-sex hormones. So there's a lot of money in this. But I want to now end, because I only have a couple of minutes, with some good news. I've brought you through some very negative news. But there is a group at the United Nations called the Group of the Friends of the Family. Governments are bonding together and starting to stand for the family. Just recently at the UN Commission on the Status of Women, we got more family-friendly language in that document that came out of there than ever before. And a series of family protection resolutions have passed the Human Rights Council. And we have some tools for you. We commissioned a study that has just been published in 2019, and it is the most comprehensive study of comprehensive sexuality education worldwide, and it found a dismal failure rate. So you can take this to your governments and stop these policies pushing comprehensive sexuality education. We also have this documentary. You'll be passed out a card that has the website. We have it translated in 12 different languages, and it will help you mobilize people to fight this sexual agenda. Here's some of the languages in which it is. And then also, the UN African Group, the voting bloc of African countries, has a firm position against comprehensive sexuality education. The United States government now has a firm position against comprehensive sexuality education. Governments are starting to becoming aware of this insidious agenda and standing up and stopping it. And families are rising up all around the world. And many of you have seen these demonstrations in your countries, or maybe even organized them. We also have a tool that we were going to share with you. It's called Stand for the Family. You'll be handed out a petition, a Stand for the Family petition, and if you sign it, you'll receive an electronic copy of this book. We call it our Family Defense Handbook. Family Watch, one of our missions is to empower you, policymakers and lawmakers, with tools to defend the family. And we have a phone app, and you'll be given instructions on how you can download it, which has talking points, social science-based and legal-based talking points on all of the most controversial issues that you're dealing with as policymakers and pro-family advocates. And it has many tools in there that we can explain to you through some emails later. I'll just skip through this. Just kind of an overview. And this book will also be in that phone app. So I end with my family. I think that what motivates most of us is our families. And we have a theme song. We hold a global family policy forum each year for UN diplomats to prepare them for the battle at the United Nations. And this song is sung at the end of each forum. And I'm just going to end with the last few lines from it. It says, "The family is the beating heart that keeps the nation strong. If families fail, then nations fall, and all that's good is gone. The time has come, the time is now, for everyone to see that if we are to save the world, we must save the family." Thank you.